Hey, friends, welcome to the Living Truth Podcast. This is Kristen Carey. I am having another amazing conversation now with my friend Anna. Anna, thank you so much for doing this second conversation on our podcast.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Awesome. I'll tell you guys about Anna just in case you haven't listened to our other episode together and you don't know who she is. So, Anna Christine Seipel is a licensed counselor. She's a retreat leader and a researcher. She's currently getting her doctorate in Scotland, and she loves cultivating healing spaces that honor the entirety of our embodied beings. Anna has walked her own personal path of pain, and she's so passionate about using her own experience and her professional knowledge as a therapist. She's so passionate to help other people heal and create beauty in the messiness of life and in grief. And we will link information about Anna, her website, in the show notes so you can learn more about her. So today we're going to talk about a really important topic, and that is autonomy and its importance in a well lived Christian life. But how often, because of the way that we are raised or how we're taught to look at the world and God and hierarchy, how often we don't learn how to use our autonomy in God given ways, in ways that are strong and yet tender
Mm.
and soft to the power and love of God flowing through us. This is a tough one. Anna, tell me a little bit more about why this topic is so meaningful to you.
Yeah, I really was curious about this when first hearing someone named Hilary McBride speak about it. So she's a psychologist in Canada and she does a lot of work around spiritual trauma and harm. And I met her on a project that we were both a part of, trying to bring mental health resources to people who had experienced spiritual trauma and harm. And after that, I wasn't very familiar with her work, and I'd heard she had this really great podcast. And I also got to hear her kind of give a lecture type thing. And it was the first time, I say all this to say, it was the first time I heard someone talk about what I had learned about development in my counseling program with spiritual or religious trauma. I had never heard those things talked about in conversation with each other. And so it was really fascinating to me because I knew both of these things, right? I had lived through trauma that had really deep, painful spiritual, religious elements to it that were incredibly wounding. And I had, gone to school to become a clinical mental health therapist where I had to learn all about human development. And I'd actually even done adjunct teaching at a university where I was teaching full classes on human development. So I knew these things really well, had never heard them with each other. And when I had first heard her name, what can happen when we don't go through what is one of our early developmental stages of growth when we're kids, of developing autonomy, how that can play out when we're an adult, especially in a religious and spiritual space, the harm that it can do. I I honestly kind of felt like I was punched in the stomach. Like I remember having a very strong embodied reaction because it hit home so closely. It was like she named something that I knew so deeply that I had experienced and it had just never been named like that before. And so for me that's why I'm so interested in it because I think it's powerful and important to be able to name things, especially things that are really hard to name.
No wonder it had such an impact on you because it's like a light bulb went on for you of that's what this was. That's where this came from. Anna, I would love to hear more about when you became aware that that's something you had experienced was this trauma of living in a system and in a world
Mhm.
where oftentimes autonomy is not well taught and
Mhm.
stewarded. Like
Mhm.
anything you want to unpack from your own personal story about why that is so meaningful to you and what you experienced.
Yeah, absolutely. For me, it really came down to I had experienced very personally, but also in a faith community, very clear positions and roles of power
Yeah.
and the obedience that was expected within those dynamics. And then also, that just that this interplay that's so unspoken, but also so clear of when someone is in this position of power, they have, in effect, like a right to make certain decisions or to discern certain things or to be the final say or the final authority. And when having experienced that from people in a way that turned out to be really, really damaging and really, really harmful and not understanding why, like I knew it was damaging, I knew it was harmful because I lived through it. But I didn't understand why. I didn't understand, kind of putting the puzzle pieces together of kind of how could that even happen, right? Like how could we even get to this place where this kind of harm is going on and you actually are in a position of power where you could be helping, but instead you're actually harming,
Yeah.
and so to hear this spoken of, oh, this makes sense that if these people were never given opportunities when they were younger, when they were kids, just navigating their way through life, navigating their way through developmental stages. I'll nerd out just super briefly. So one of the most common things of development is someone named Eric Erickson, these different stages of development, right? And there's this like crises of you're kind of trying to navigate these different things and you have to navigate those things to be able to develop kind of these core building blocks of being a person, being a
Yeah.
human who functions in the world. And one of these really young ones has to do with autonomy. And what's really fascinating is in that developmental framework, if we don't develop autonomy, the opposite is shame. That's our alternative. And while I am a non-pathologizing therapist, the language that's used around that is a core pathology of if we don't develop this thing, we're instead going to be left with a core pathology. And when you think about what that's going to like breed in a person's life, to me, it wasn't just a light bulb, it was all these puzzle pieces coming together of like, of course this went sideways then when someone was not taught, okay, with your autonomy, you know, this is what it looks like to live that out in a way that's God honoring and Christ-like and this and that. But instead, when autonomy is like, well, don't just follow your will. Your will is sinful and bad, and that gets squashed. And so then there's no room for a kid then to kind of figure out, well, what does it look like to exercise autonomy. Fast forward 10, 20, 30 years, they have a position of power where they have
Mm.
to make decisions. They have to exercise their autonomy. They have to exercise their will, and they have to do so in a way that's going to impact other people. I think, of course, there's not going to be the scaffolding there for them to know how to do that well. And there's going to be a lot of room for it to instead to do harm.
Mm. And I think too of the people that are sitting there being harmed.
Yeah.
And just I'll speak for self. There have been times where I have believed there is no choice here. There is no option. I have to
Yeah.
do this thing
Yeah.
because of my own the damage to my own autonomy
Yeah.
in childhood, right? Of like
Mhm.
I was not allowed to do certain things. And obviously there needs to be boundaries. I'm not referring to like let a child run amok and do whatever they want, right? There has to be healthy boundaries.
Exactly.
But when we're
Yeah.
not allowed to have our own thoughts, feelings,
Hmm.
reactions, needs, strong desires, and our own
Yeah.
will
Hmm.
in a healthy way and decisions in a healthy way,
Hmm.
then and especially if we grow up with addictions or
Yeah.
emotionally immature parents who are not able to be there for us, then
Yeah.
our autonomy is damaged in such a way that maybe we're we turn a blind eye when somebody is
Hmm.
exercising this kind of power in a destructive
Hmm.
way, whether
Yeah.
we go into a freeze response because it's
Hmm.
so overwhelming to us,
Hmm.
or whether we just feel like, well, this is just what always happens, and we just don't know any better. We don't know
Yeah.
that there is another way to be.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And I think you're hitting the nail on the head with, it doesn't have to be this either or of either, for a kid, there's no room at all for them to exercise their will or autonomy and things like that, or they're allowed to just be like this little hellion who's running amok and creating chaos. This is one of the things that I think is really hard about kids is like the time that it takes to to really create kind of these safe parameters that gives them space to develop and grow and navigate life and become the little human that they are becoming and that God created. That's hard to do, right? No parent is going to do that perfectly. So, this isn't about how do parents, meet this unattainable standard with their kids. But I think it's more a curiosity around when we have this deficit in a foundational building block of our development, not only how does it show up later, but what does it look like to restore that?
Mm,
What does it look like to go back to that foundation and do some healing work? And like you said, it's on either side of the equation, right? If we're used to not having a say, if we're used to not being able to say no, thinking that our no or our yes doesn't matter, won't be
yeah.
heard, isn't invited, right? There's so many ways that this can go that it can be really disorienting and just even foreign. And I think just also feels risky because of how much it gets equated. Autonomy, I think, can be so easily equated as synonymous with our will in a way that is synonymous with sin.
Yeah, like it's rebellion or something.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that it's really important to slow down with that and consider, well, maybe there are aspects of this, it's in our autonomy that we love God and love others.
Absolutely, because God did not make us robots where we have to love him. It's our choice.
Yeah.
That is at the heart of love is that free
Mhm.
will choice.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, yeah, I think there's just so much space for restoration of that and co-creating with God, of creating in ourselves and in relational dynamics with others and in systems, dynamics where things are done differently, where power doesn't have this ability to kind of twist or distort or muddy things up in ways that it so easily can. And I think I I wasn't initially going to go here, but this is just really strongly coming to mind right now. I think there's a lot of humility in that. And I think that's part of why it can be really hard, right? To have the humility of like, I don't know how to hold this position of power very well. Or I don't know if I'm doing a good job at this, right? There's a lot of humility
Yeah,
required to do that. And that's scary.
it
And
is
so
scary.
it might feel safer to try to just pretend like we know what we're doing. But then what are we holding liable then to have harmed in the process
Mm,
if we're in a position of power with that?
yeah. Um, the thing that comes to my mind the most that makes my heart just hurt is so many women that I see and walk alongside in my groups and in my one-on-one work where they have just always believed their job is to go along with whatever their husband
Mhm.
says, especially if they're in ministry. Like I have a
Yeah.
lot of women who are either pastors' wives or their husband is in full-time ministry.
Mhm.
This expectation that I'm just his helper and I need to stay quiet. And then when it becomes apparent that he's living this secret sexual life, of course
Mhm.
that blows up. And the whole
Yeah.
mindset of like, what is my role? What is my duty?
Mm.
What is my right? Am I allowed to have my own thoughts, feelings, opinions as a separate
Mhm.
person? Am I allowed to speak up for myself and say, no, I'm
Yeah.
not okay with this? Or is
Mhm.
that rebellion?
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
autonomy, as I think about the women that might be listening to this,
Mhm.
can feel really scary, especially when using it it can feel scary because it can be a risk to a rupture in the attachment if your husband is not
Hmm.
willing to let you have a voice, to
Yeah.
listen to your own individual thoughts and feelings and needs.
Hmm. Yeah.
And we were
Yeah.
talking before we recorded about the gift that God's given to you in your marriage now with a husband that supports
Hmm.
you so fully and completely and becoming all that God has created you to be. And what a
Hmm.
difference that has made in your life to have
Yeah.
that kind of safety. But a lot of women don't have
Hmm. Yeah. And I think one of the heartbreaking things is like you named is especially in places where, you're in a space of ministry or pastoral work. It's not just, am I going to create a rupture? And so even that, right? Like a sense of I would be responsible for the rupture if I use my voice here on the other side of something that I never asked for, right? That I didn't want to have happen. But then also the fear of, will this create a rupture with my faith family? Will this create a rupture with my job? And I
that.
say this not hypothetically, I say this as someone who lived that, right? Who had to very much face a lot of fear of if I don't stay in line in the right ways, I will lose my job. I
Yeah.
will lose a lot of people that I've considered family. And, in terms of, the person I was trying to work out things with, there wasn't room for me to have my own autonomy that it was a threat and a risk to protecting what had been protected for that betrayal to go on as long as it had, right?
Yeah.
And I think what's so hard about that is you get put in a no-win situation. So even that can be really confusing around autonomy, right? So you can be like, okay, I
Absolutely.
have my autonomy right now, but what good does it do me? I have no good
Mhm.
options
Right.
in front of me. And so I mean that's I think soul crushing in a way. And like you said, it's heart-wrenching, it's heartbreaking of yeah, I might come to the place of wanting to use my voice and wanting to, be clear about a yes or a no or whatever that might be. But then at the end of the day, if we're in a situation that we didn't ask for, that's a no-win situation, it can feel like that's not helpful. It can feel like that doesn't um, maybe support us in the ways we would want it to be able to support us.
Mm. It's okay. It is so painful and heartbreaking. I'm just going to go dip my toe in a little bit deeper on this, though.
Hmm.
So, listeners, this might be a little triggering. I invite you to take a couple deep breaths. But a lot of the women that are listening to this right now in the face of betrayal, and maybe it's been a while and you're not in like early like bleed out trauma phases. Maybe you're a little further down the line and you're trying to stay in this relationship and you have a spouse who is wanting to reintegrate a sexual relationship even after he has not done his work. He has not given you a full disclosure and a polygraph. He's not admitted he has a serious issue that he needs to change from. He's still not treating you with love, care, dignity, and respect. And the question is on the table, will you or won't you do this? And in your autonomy, in your ability to make choices, there is no, I don't know that there is a more tender area than this
Hmm.
area of sexuality.
Hmm. Yeah.
And you're stuck with, again, like you mentioned, Anna, these no good choices because to say no, I'm not comfortable having a sexual relationship with you because you have not done this work to create safety and truth in our relationship, you risk losing the relationship or living with a really grumpy spouse who's really like a little boy in a man's body demanding.
Yeah.
Sorry, is that too judgmental? Um, well, it's a thing. And
Mm.
then, or you say yes to keep the peace Meanwhile, you have
Mhm.
to dissociate and deaden your whole body and soul and spirit in
Yeah.
order to tolerate that because you don't feel safe in the relationship.
Yeah.
Thoughts, Anna?
Yeah.
That's a tough one.
It is. And what I want to first say is, your comment there of is that too harsh? Really what I think it for me goes back to is I don't remember the exact line, but the thing that I heard Hillary McBride say in a podcast around this whole thing with autonomy and people in positions of power in faith communities and religious spaces was the sense of that's why it can feel like at times there are children, that it's like children running the show when they're
Yes,
adults. And that's what
yes,
it is, where, not saying that in it, like I know that it can come across as judgmental, but it not being said from a judgmental space, but that really being the experience. Because
you're
if
right.
there is a core
Yes,
facet of our human development from childhood that is not developed, and we get stuck back there, then yes, we are functioning at that child level. So I think I want to name
you're
that
right.
of I think that can absolutely come out not having to be a judgment, but simply calling a spade for what we're experiencing in part of
Yes,
the difficult position that you're put in. And then, to go to that tender space of what do you do in that, what do you do in that situation? I think exactly as you said, there's no winning because I think it's not only a do I say no and possibly lose the relationship? Do I say no and live with a grumpy person? I remember just the horrible sense of feeling like, well, if I say no, am I then responsible for him acting out more? If I say no, then am I a bad wife and is it my fault? Right? Like the
oh,
fact that
yes.
we have to carry those kinds of questions and have people say things like that. I mean, I know a woman who was walking through this exact scenario and literally had a woman from her church sit her down and tell her, have sex with your husband. And she was just like, I'm not right. And she was really in a safe where she was in a space where it was not safe for her to do that for a number of reasons,
Yeah.
including medically, it was not safe. And to have that pressure, whether it's spoken or unspoken, not just in your marriage, but even in the system around you, I mean, like you said, because it's so tender, I think sometimes we almost become desensitized to how horrific that actually is. But that really is, I mean, it's dehumanizing, I
It
think.
is. It
Yeah.
is. And what you touched on with the if I say no, do I run the risk of he's going to go act out? And then is it my
Mhm.
fault? That is a very common struggle,
Mhm.
right? And the reality is that even women who are regularly, very regularly engaging sexually with their spouse,
Yeah.
if he's a sexual addict, if he's got problematic sexual behavior, whatever
Hmm.
the root causes are, those things are going to happen whether you're being sexual with him or not, because it's a whole separate
Yes.
uh, problem.
Well,
It's
and I think
not a marital sex. That
yeah,
marital sex does not solve that problem.
absolutely. And I think what it really gets to, and I know a lot of people are impacted by this. I know especially women are impacted by this really being taught from a young age, again, whether it's implicit or explicit, that we are somehow responsible for what other people do or don't do, right? That we need to take that on. And so then I think that complicates autonomy in a way of, well, I'm not actually free to choose what I do because I have been trained to think through whatever I do or don't do, what am I then responsible for? What will that I then carry as something that I'm responsible for, even though I'm not actually responsible for that?
That takes a long time to undo
Mm-hmm.
that mindset, to even recognize, first of all, that we're living in it,
Yeah.
to catch it when it happens, and to let go of that burden.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And it's scary. It's scary because I think there's a sense of almost security in feeling as though if I make the right choice, right? If I can figure out how to use my autonomy to make the right choice to
Mm.
get to where I want to go and have this person do the thing that I really want them to do or not do the thing I really don't want them to do, right? There's almost this illusion of control in that that can feel helpful and feel a bit nicer than really feeling not in control. I mean, that when I describe the biggest thing that I learned after walking through betrayal, it's that since then in my life, I have never forgotten that I don't know what's next, right? And that's terrifying. I want to name that and acknowledge that of how scary that is to be so faced with how much things are not in our control. And I want to honor that and let it be a both and also it's so freeing to know that we're not responsible for other people and it's not how life goes is not within our control. We don't have to try to hold all of that.
Mm. That is terrifying and freeing at the same time.
Mhm.
It really is. Do you have any other thoughts about this topic, Anna, that you want to share with our audience before we close?
Yeah, I think just going back to curiosity of what does it look like to have some curiosity around how much we might be quick to equate autonomy with like our will and therefore sin. And like, is there a way to slice this thinner or slice this differently and to get curious about that? I just think it's a really worthwhile thing to slow down with on our own and to chat about with other people.
I do too. And I think about what powerfully beautiful things can happen when we are living in union with God, when we are exercising our autonomy of our individual personhood
Mm,
for His glory
yeah.
and in love with God. It is a powerful thing. And these are the people that are living like that are the most fully alive,
Mm,
vibrant people. And
yeah.
it's a beautiful thing. I think
Mhm.
I think that this is so hopeful. So thank you again so much, Anna, for sharing your wisdom and experience and expertise on the Living Truth podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Friends, thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope this has been a helpful conversation. We'll put links to how to connect with Anna in our show notes. And until the next episode, I am holding out hope for you.